Ebla. Published November the 12th, 2017. Special characters are denoted as follows. And denotes left and right parentheses. Denotes a bullet point. Denotes an M dash. Ebla. Modern Tell Mardikh was one of the earliest kingdoms in Syria. Its remains constitute a tell located about 55 kilometers, 34 miles, southwest of Aleppo near the village of Mardikh. Ebla was an important center throughout the 3rd millennium BC and in the first half of the 2nd millennium BC. Its discovery proved the Levant was a center of ancient, centralized civilization equal to Egypt and Mesopotamia, and ruled out the view that the latter two were the only important centers in the Near East during the early Bronze Age. Karl Moore described the first Eblate kingdom as the first recorded world power, starting as a small settlement in the early Bronze Age. c. 3500 BC. Ebla developed into a trading empire and later into an expansionist power that imposed its hegemony over much of northern and eastern Syria. Ebla was destroyed during the 23rd century BC. It was then rebuilt and was mentioned in the records of the 3rd dynasty of Ur. The second Ebla was a continuation of the first, ruled by a new royal dynasty. It was destroyed at the end of the 3rd millennium BC, which paved the way for the Amorite tribes to settle in the city, forming the 3rd Ebla. The 3rd kingdom also flourished as a trade center. It became a subject and an ally of Yamma'ad, modern-day Aleppo, until its final destruction by the Hittite king Mursili in c. 1600 BC. Ebla maintained its prosperity through a vast trading network. Artifacts from Sumer, Cyprus, Egypt and as far as Afghanistan were recovered from the city's palaces. The kingdom had its own language, Eblate, and the political organization of Ebla had features different from the Sumerian model. Women enjoyed a special status and the queen had major influence in the state and religious affairs. The pantheon of gods was mainly North Semitic and included deities exclusive to Ebla. The city was excavated starting in 1964 and became famous for the Ebla tablets, an archive of about 20,000 cuneiform tablets found there, dated to around 2350 BC. Written in both Sumerian and Eblate and using the cuneiform, the archive has allowed a better understanding of the Sumerian language and provided important information over the political organization and social customs of the mid-3rd millennium BC's Levant. Part 1. History. A possible meaning of the word Ebla is white rock, referring to the limestone outcrop on which the city was built. Ebla was first settled around 3500 BC. Its growth was supported by many satellite agricultural settlements. The city benefited from its role as an entrepot of growing international trade, which probably began with an increased demand for wool in Sumer. Archaeologists designate this early habitation period Mardikh. It ended around 3000 BC. Mardikh is followed by the 1st and 2nd kingdoms era between about 3000 and 2000 BC, designated Mardikh II. J. Gelb consider Ebla as part of the Kush civilization, which was a cultural entity of East Semitic-speaking populations that stretched from the center of Mesopotamia to the western Levant. Part 1. History. Chapter 1. First Kingdom. During the First Kingdom period between about 3000 and 2300 BC, Ebla was the most prominent kingdom among the Syrian states, especially during the second half of the 3rd millennium BC, which is known as the Age of the Archives after the Ebla tablets. Chapter 1. First Kingdom. Section 1. Early Period. The early period between 3000 and 2400 BC is designated Mardikh IA. General knowledge about the city's history prior to the written archives is obtained through excavations. The first stages of Mardikh IA is identified with building cc. and structures that form a part of building G2, which was apparently a royal palace built c. 2700 BC. Toward the end of this period, a 100 Years' War with Mari started. Mari gained the upper hand through the actions of its king Saumu, who conquered many of Ebla's cities. In the mid-25th century BC, King Kund Amu defeated Mari, but the state's power declined following his reign. Chapter 1, First Kingdom. Section 2, Archive Period. The Archive Period, which is designated Mardikh IIB-1, lasted from c. 2400 BC until c. 2300 BC. The end of the period is known as the First Destruction, mainly referring to the destruction of the royal palace, called Palace G, and built over the earlier G2, and much of the Acropolis. During the Archive period, Ebla had political and military dominance over the other Syrian city-states of northern and eastern Syria, which are mentioned in the archives. Most of the tablets, which date from that period, are about economic matters but also include royal letters and diplomatic documents. The written archives do not date from before Igrish-Halam's reign, which saw Ebla paying tribute to Mari, and an extensive invasion of Eblate cities in the Middle Euphrates region led by the Mariot king Iblu-ul-Il. Ebla recovered under King Urkabd-Amu in about 2340 BC, becoming prosperous and launching a successful counter-offensive against Mari. Urkabd-Amu concluded a peace and trading treaty with Abasil. It is one of the earliest recorded treaties in history. At its greatest extent, Ebla controlled an area roughly half the size of modern Syria, from Ursum in the north, to the area around Damascus in the south, and from Phoenicia and the coastal mountains in the west, to Hadu in the east. Large parts of the kingdom were under the direct control of the king and was administered by governors. The rest consisted of vassal kingdoms. One of the most important of these vassals was Ami, which is the city most often mentioned in the Ebla tablets. Ebla had more than 60 vassal kingdoms and city-states, including Hazuon, Burman, Emar, Halabitu and Salbatu. The vizier was the king's chief official. The holder of the office possessed great authority. The most powerful vizier was Ibrahim, who campaigned against Abasil during the term of his predecessor Arukum. During the reign of Isard-Amu, Ebla continued the war against Mari, which defeated Ebla's ally Nagara, blocking trade routes between Ebla and southern Mesopotamia via Upper Mesopotamia. Ebla conducted regular military campaigns against rebellious vassals, including several attacks on Ami, and a campaign against the southern region of Ebla, close to Katna. In order to settle the war with Mari, Isard-Amu allied with Nagar and Kish. The campaign was headed by the Eblate vizier Ibisipish, who led the combined armies to victory in a battle near Tur. The alliance also attacked Ami and occupied it, leaving Ibisipish's son Enzi-Malik as governor. Ebla suffered its first destruction a few years after the campaign, probably following Isard-Amu's death. Chapter 1, First Kingdom. Section 3, First Destruction of Ebla. The first destruction occurred circa. Palace G was burned, baking the clay tablets of the royal archives and preserving them. Many theories about the cause and the perpetrator have been posited. Early dating hypothesis. Giovanni Pettinato supports an early dating for Ebla that would put the destruction at around 2500 BC. Pettinato, while preferring the date of 2500 BC, later accepted the event could have happened in 2400 BC. The scholar suggests the city was destroyed in 2400 BC by a Mesopotamian such as Enatum of Lagash, who boasted of taking tribute from Mari, or Lugal's Ajezi of Umar, who claimed to have reached the Mediterranean. Akkadian hypothesis. Both Kings Sargon of Akkad and his grandson Naram-Sin claimed to have destroyed a town called Ebla. The discoverer of Ebla, Paolo Mattiello, considers Sargon a more likely culprit. His view is supported by Trevor Bryce, but rejected by Michael Est. Mari's revenge. According to Alfonso Archi and Maria Biga, the destruction happened approximately 3 or 4 years after the Battle of Tur. Archi and Biga say the destruction was caused by Mari in retaliation for its humiliating defeat at Tur. This view is supported by Mario Liverani. Archi says the Mariote king Ski Mari destroyed Ebla before ascending the throne of his city. Natural catastrophe. Est says a natural catastrophe caused the blaze which ended the archive period. He says the destruction was limited to the area of the royal palace and there is no convincing evidence of looting. He dates the fire to c. 2290 BC. Middle chronology. Part 1. History. Chapter 2. Second Kingdom. The Second Kingdom's period is designated Mardikh IIB2 and spans the period between 2300 and 2000 BC. The Second Kingdom lasted until Ebla's second destruction, which occurred any time between 2050 and 1950 BC, with the 2000 BC dating being a mere formal date. The Akkadians under Sargon and his descendant Naram-Sin invaded the northern borders of Ebla aiming for the forests of the Amarnas mountain. The intrusions were separated by roughly 90 years and the areas attacked were not attached to Akkad. Archi accept that the Ebla mentioned in the annals of Sargon and Naram-Sin as the Syrian Ebla but do not consider them responsible for the destruction which ended the archive period. By the time of Naram-Sin, Ami was the hegemonic city in northern Syria and was destroyed by the Akkadian king. A new local dynasty ruled the Second Kingdom of Ebla, but there was continuity with its First Kingdom heritage. Ebla maintained its earliest features, including its architectural style and the sanctity of the First Kingdom's religious sites. A new royal palace was built in the lower town, and the transition from the archive period is marked only by the destruction of palace. Little is known about the Second Kingdom because no written material have been discovered aside from one inscription dating to the end of the period. The Second Kingdom was attested to in contemporaneous sources. In an inscription, Gudiravalagash asked for cedars to be brought from Urshu in the mountains of Ebla, indicating Ebla's territory included Urshu north of Karkmish in modern-day Turkey. Texts that dates to the 7th year of Amarsin, c. 2040 BC. A ruler of the Uri Empire, mention a messenger of the Ensi. Megam of Ebla. The Second Kingdom was considered of vassal by the Uri government, but the nature of the relation is unknown and it included the payment of tribute. A formal recognition of overlordship appears to be a condition for the right of trade with the empire. The Second Kingdom disintegrated toward the end of the 21st century BC, and ended with the destruction of the city by fire, although evidence for the event has only been found outside of the so-called Temple of the Rock, and in the area around Palace, on the Acropolis. The reason for the destruction is not known. According to Est, it could have been the result of a Huron invasion c. 2030 BC, led by the former Eblate vassal city of Akinkalis. The destruction of Ebla is mentioned in the fragmentary Hurro-Hittite legendary epic Song of Release, discovered in 1983, which Est considers as describing the destruction of the Second Kingdom. In the epic, an Eblate assembly led by a man called Zazalat prevents King Meki from showing mercy to prisoners from Ebla's former vassal Akinkalis, provoking the wrath of the Huron storm god Teshub and causing him to destroy the city. Part 1. History. Chapter 3. Third Kingdom. The Third Kingdom is designated Mardikh III. It is divided into periods A. C. 2000 to 1800 BC, and B. C. 1800 to 1600 BC. In period A, Ebla was quickly rebuilt as a planned city. The foundations covered the remains of Mardikh II, new palaces and temples were built, and new fortifications were built in 2 circles. one for the La City and one for the Acropolis. The city was laid out on regular lines and large public buildings were built. Further construction took place in period B. The first known king of the Third Kingdom is Ebla, who described himself as the Mekim of Ebla. A basalt votive statue bearing Ebla's inscription was discovered in 1968. This helped to identify the site of Tell Mardikh with the ancient kingdom Ebla. The name of the king is Amorite in the view of Pettinato. It is therefore probable the inhabitants of Third Kingdom Ebla were predominantly Amorites, as were most of the inhabitants of Syria at the time. By the beginning of the 18th century BC, Ebla had become a vassal of Yama'ad, an Amorite kingdom centered in Aleppo. Written records are not available for this period, but the city was still a vassal during Yarim II of Yam'ad's reign. One of the known rulers of Ebla during this period was Uwimer, who received gifts from the Egyptian pharaoh Hotepaba, indicating the continuing wide connections and importance of Ebla. The city was mentioned in tablets from the Yamhadite vassal city of Lilik in modern-day Turkey. An Eblate princess married a son of King Amentarquim of Lilik, who belonged to a branch of the royal Yamhadite dynasty. Ebla was destroyed by the Hittite king Mursili I in about 1600 BC. Indilimo was probably the last king of Ebla. A seal of his crown prince Maratwari was discovered in the Western Palace, Q. According to Archie, the Song of Release epic describes the destruction of the Third Kingdom and preserves older elements. Part 1. History. Chapter 4. Later periods. Ebla never recovered from its third destruction. It was a small village in the phase designated Mardikh for 1600 to 1200 BC, and was mentioned in the records of Lilik as a vassal to the Adrimi dynasty. Mardikh v. 1200 to 535 BC was a rural, early Iron Age settlement that grew in size during later periods. Further development occurred during Mardikh VI, which lasted until c. 60 AD. Mardikh VII began in the 3rd century AD and lasted until the 7th century, after which the site was abandoned. Part 2. Site. Part 2. Site. Chapter 1. City layout. Ebla consisted of a lower town and a raised acropolis in the center. During the First Kingdom, the city had an area of 56 hectares and was protected by mud brick fortifications. Ebla was divided into 4 districts, each with its own gate in the outer wall. The Acropolis included the King's Palace, G, and one of 2 temples in city dedicated to Kura, called the Red Temple. The lower city included the second temple of Kura in the southeast called Temple of the Rock. During the Second Kingdom, a royal palace, Archaic Palace, P5, was built in the lower town northwest of the Acropolis, in addition to Temple D, built over the destroyed Red Temple. During the Third Kingdom, Ebla was a large city nearly 60 hectares in size, and was protected by a fortified rampart with double-chambered gates. The Acropolis was fortified and separated from the lower town. New Royal Palace, E, was built on the Acropolis during Mardikh IIB, and a Temple of Ishtar was constructed over the former Red and D temples. In Area D, the lower town was also divided into 4 districts. Palace P5 was used during Mardikh IIA and replaced during Mardikh IIB by the Intermediate Palace. Other Third Kingdom buildings included the Vizier Palace, the Western Palace, in Area Q, the Temple of Shamash, Temple N, the Temple of Rasap, Temple B1, and the Northern Palace, built over the Intermediate Palace. In the north of the lower town, a second temple for Ishtar was built, while the former Temple of the Rock was replaced by a Temple of Hadad. Part 2. Site. Chapter 2. Royal Burials. The kings of the First Kingdom were buried outside the city. The last 10 kings, ending with Urkab-Damu, were buried in Darab, while older kings were buried in a royal mausoleum located in Binas, and only one royal tomb dating to the First Kingdom was discovered in Ebla. Hypogeum G4. This First Kingdom tomb was probably built during the reign of the last king and might be an indication of Eblate adoption of Mesopotamian traditions to bury the kings beneath their royal palaces. The Third Kingdom royal necropolis was discovered beneath Palace Q, the Western Palace. It contains many hypogea, but only 3 were excavated. Those tombs were natural caves in the bedrock of the palace's foundation. They all date to the 19th and 18th centuries BC and had a similar plan consisting of an entrance shaft, burial chambers and a dromos connecting the shaft to the chamber. Chapter 2. Royal Burials. Section 1. Hypogeum G4. The royal tomb found in the royal palace G is designated Hypogeum G4. It dates to the Archive period, most probably the reign of Isar-Damu. The tomb is heavily damaged. Most of its stones were sacked and nothing of the roof system remains. It also lacks any skeletal remains or funerary goods, suggesting that it was either heavily pillaged, never used, or was built as a cenotaph. Excavated between 1992 and 1995, it is located underneath the western sector of the palace at a depth of almost 6 meters. The tomb is composed of 2 rooms opened on each other with lime plaster floors. Both rooms are rectangular in shape. The eastern room, L.6402, is 4 meters wide, more than 3.5 meters long. Total length is unknown due to heavy damage. And west-east oriented. The western room, L.5762, is 5.20 meters long, 4 meters wide and west-east oriented. Limestone was used to build the walls, and few blocks protruding from the sides toward the middle of the rooms suggest the roof to have been a corbelled vault. Chapter 2. Royal Burials. Section 2. Western Palace Tombs. The tomb of the princess, dating to c. 1800 BC. It is the oldest and smallest of the Third Kingdom tombs found. Excavated in 1978, it contained the remains of a young woman, hence the naming. The dormouse has steps, partially cut in the bedrock and partially paved with stones, leading to the chamber, which was achieved through the enlargement of a natural cave. The tomb is the only one not pillaged. It contained precious jewels and funerary objects. The tomb of the Sistans. This tomb is the most damaged in the necropolis. It consists of a double-room burial, the earliest, Q79A, was built at the same period of the tomb of the princess, and was badly damaged when the tomb was reused, and a dromos was built in the place of Q79 toward the end of the 17th century BC, leading to the founding of burial Q79B. This was probably the resting place of a king, a club, a symbol of royal power, was discovered in Q79A. The tomb of the Lord of the Goats. It is the largest in the necropolis. It includes 2 depositional chambers and is reached through a vertical shaft. The occupier of the tomb is not known with certainty. He is called the Lord of the Goats by archaeologists due to the existence of a throne decorated with bronze goat heads in the tomb. A silver cup that has the name of King Amir inscribed was found in the tomb, making that king the most likely owner of the burial. Part 3. Government. The First Kingdom's government consisted of the king, styled Malakim, and the Grand Vizier, who headed a council of elders, Abu, and the administration. The Second Kingdom was a monarchy, but little is known about it because of a lack of written records. The Third Kingdom was a city-state monarchy with reduced importance under the authority of Yamad. Part 3. Government. Chapter 1. Administration of the First Kingdom. Further information can be found in the article on Vizier. Ebla. The Queen shared the running of affairs of state with the King. The Crown Prince was involved in internal matters and the Second Prince was involved in foreign affairs. Most duties, including military ones, were handled by the Vizier and the administration, which consisted of 13 court dignitaries, each of whom controlled between 400 and 800 men, forming a bureaucracy with 11,700 people. Each of the 4 quarters of the lower city was governed by a chief inspector and many deputies. To oversee royal interest, the king employed agents, mashkim, collectors, and messengers. Kaz. Chapter 1. Administration of the First Kingdom. Section 1. Administrative divisions. Many client kingdoms owed allegiance to Ebla and each was ruled by its own king. N. Those vassal kings were highly autonomous, paying tribute and supplying military assistance to Ebla. The administrative center in the capital was named the Sa.Za. It included the royal palaces, storerooms and some temples. Regions beyond the walls of the capital were collectively named in Eblate texts Yoruba, literally meaning outside of the city. The villages and towns under the central authority were either ruled directly from the capital, or had appointed officials. The titles of the civil servants do not clearly define the bearers' responsibilities and authority, as each town had its own political traditions. Lugal. While in Mesopotamia Lugal designated a king, in Ebla it designated a governor who was directly under the authority of the capital. The nature of this title as part of Eblate bureaucracy is ambiguous. Each Lugal was under the authority of the Grand Vizier, and the bearers ruled cities directly under the authority of the capital, and they all brought goods to be kept in Ebla's storehouses. Petin Arto counted 14 different Lugals in the Eblate administrative texts and deduced that the kingdom was divided into 14 departments, 2 of them in the capital itself and the remaining 12 spanned the rest of the kingdom. Ugula. The title is translated as superintendent. Some Ugulas were actually independent rulers and some represented the highest authority of a tribal group. Many cities had an appointed Ugula as their head of administration, such as the city of Dharam. Chapter 1. Administration of the First Kingdom. Section 2. The Chora. The regions under the direct control of the king that were economically vital for the capital are called the Chora by archaeologists. Regions under direct control of the king extended beyond the Chora, and it is difficult to determine the exact size of the kingdom and the Chora due to the constant military expansion of Ebla, which added new territories. Some of those were ruled directly while others were allowed to retain their own rulers as vassals. Generally, the Chora is the core region of Ebla that includes the economic hinterland supporting the capital. It includes the cities and villages where the king or his vizier had palaces, towns that included important sanctuaries of gods related to the royal institution, towns visited by the monarch during the different rituals he participated in, such as the renewal of royalty ritual, and other cities such as the ones where textiles were delivered. The Chora spans around 3,000 km2. From west to east it includes the plains east of Jebel Zawiya, the Mfkh swamp, Al-Has mountain and Mount Shabith. Areas directly on the borders of the Chora such as Al-Ga'ab, Al-Rouge Plain and Al-Jabal have close cultural affinity with the Chora. Part 3. Government. Chapter 2. Kings of Ebla. For the First Kingdom monarchs, tablets listing offerings to kings mention 10 names, and another list mentions 33 kings. No kings are known from the Second Kingdom, and all dates are estimates according to the Middle chronology. element or table removed. Unsuitable for speech. Part 4. People, Language and Culture. Part 4. People, Language and Culture. Chapter 1. The First and Second Kingdoms. Mardikh II's periods shared the same culture. The population of Ebla during Mardikh IIb-1 is estimated to have numbered around 40,000 in the capital, and over 200,000 people in the entire kingdom. The Eblates of Mardikh II were Semites, close to their northwestern Semitic neighbors, such as the Amorites. Giovanni Pettinato said the Eblate language, one of the oldest attested Semitic languages, was a West Semitic language. Gelb and others said it was an East Semitic dialect closer to the Akkadian language. Academic consensus considers Eblate an East Semitic language which exhibits both West Semitic and East Semitic features. Ebla held several religious and social festivals, including rituals for the succession of a new king, which normally lasted for several weeks. The Eblate calendars were based on a solar year divided into 12 months. Two calendars were discovered: the Old Calendar, used during the reign of Igrish Halim, and a New Calendar, introduced by Vizier Bisipish. Many months were named in honor of deities. In the New Calendar, Itubili was the first month of the year, and meant the month of the Lord. Each year was given a name instead of a number. Women received salaries equal to those of men and could accede to important positions and head government agencies. The Eblates imported kungas from Nagara, and used them to draw the carriages of royalty and high officials, as well as diplomatic gifts for allied cities. Society was less centered around the palace and the temple than in Mesopotamian kingdoms. The Eblate palace was designed around the courtyard, which was open toward the city, thus making the administration approachable. This contrasts with Mesopotamian palaces, which resembled citadels with narrow entrances and limited access to the external courtyard. Music played an important part in the society, and musicians were both locals or hired from other cities such as Mari. Ebla also hired acrobats from Nagara, but later reduced their number and kept some to train local Eblate acrobats. Part 4. People, Language and Culture. Chapter 2. The Third Kingdom. The Mardikh population was predominantly Semitic Amorite. The Amorites were mentioned in the First Kingdom's tablets as neighbors and as rural subjects, and they came to dominate Ebla after the destruction of the Second Kingdom. The city witnessed a great increase in construction, and many palaces, temples and fortifications were built. The Amorite Eblates worshipped many of the same deities as the Eblates of earlier periods, and maintained the sanctity of the Acropolis in the center of the city. The Third Kingdom's iconography and royal ideology were under the influence of Yamhad's culture. Kingship was received from the Yamhadite deities instead of Ishtar of Ebla, which is evident by the Eblate seals of Indalimas period. Part 5. Economy. During the First Kingdom period, the palace controlled the economy, but wealthy families managed their financial affairs without government intervention. The economic system was redistributive. The palace distributed food to its permanent and seasonal workers. It is estimated that around 40,000 persons contributed to this system, but in general, and unlike in Mesopotamia, land stayed in the hands of villages, which paid an annual share to the palace. Agriculture was mainly pastoral. Large herds of cattle were managed by the palace. The city's inhabitants owned around 140,000 head of sheep and goats, and 9,000 cattle. Ebla derived its prosperity from trade. Its wealth was equal to that of the most important Sumerian cities, and its main commercial rival was Mari. Ebla's main articles of trade were probably timber from the nearby mountains, and textiles. Handicrafts also appear to have been a major export, evidenced by the quantity of artifacts recovered from the palaces of the city. Ebla possessed a wide commercial network reaching as far as modern-day Afghanistan. It shipped textiles to Cyprus, possibly through the port of Ugarit, but most of its trade seems to have been directed by riverboat towards Mesopotamia. chiefly Kish. The main palace, G, was found to contain artifacts dating from ancient Egypt bearing the names of pharaohs Khafra and Pepi. Ebla continued to be a center of trade during the Second Kingdom, evidenced by the surrounding cities that appeared during its period and were destroyed along with the city. Trade continued to be Ebla's main economic activity during the Third Kingdom. Archaeological finds show there was an extensive exchange with Egypt and coastal Syrian cities such as Byblos. Part 6. Religion. Ebla was a polytheistic state. During the First Kingdom, Eblates worshipped their dead kings. The pantheon of the first Ebla included pairs of deities, and they can be separated into three genres. In the first and most common one, there were the couples, such as the deity and his female consort. The second type of pairs was the divine twisomes, such as the deities that cooperate to create the cosmos, like in the Egyptian and Mesopotamian pantheons. The third type included divine pairs who were actually a single deity that had two names. Eblates worshipped few Mesopotamian deities, preferring northwestern Semitic gods, some of which were unique to Ebla. The first genre of pairs included Nidakal, who was exclusive to Ebla, and his consort, Belatu. His wife, Rasap, and his consort Adu-Amr, the patron gods of the city Kura, who was unique to Ebla, and his consort Barama. The third genre included the artisan god Kamish/Tid, Kathorwaka Asis, and the planet Venus, represented by twin mountain gods, Shahar as the morning star and Shalim as the evening star. The first Eblates worshipped many other deities, such as the Syrian goddess Ishara, who was the goddess of the royal family. Ishtar was also worshipped but was mentioned only 5 times in one of the monthly offering lists, while Ishara was far more important, appearing 40 times. Other deities included Damu, the Mesopotamian god Utu, Ashtarpi, Dagon, Hadad, and his consort Habadu, and Shipish, the goddess of the sun who had a temple dedicated to her cult. The 4 city gates were named after the gods Dagon, Hadad, Rasap, and Utu, but it is unknown which gate had which name. Overall, the offering list mentioned about 40 deities receiving sacrifices. During the Third Kingdom, Amorites worshipped common northern Semitic gods. The unique Eblate deities disappeared. Hadad was the most important god, while Ishtar took Ishra's place and became the city's most important deity apart from Hadad. Part 6. Religion. Chapter 1. Biblical Connection Theories. Further information can be found in the article on Ebla Biblical Controversy. At the beginning of the process of deciphering the tablets, Pettinato made claims about possible connections between Ebla and the Bible, citing an alleged references in the tablets to the existence of Yahweh, the patriarchs, Sodom and Gomorrah, and other biblical references. However, much of the initial media excitement about supposed Eblate connections with the Bible, based on preliminary guesses and speculations by Pettinato and others, is now widely discredited, and the academic consensus is that Ebla has no bearing on the minor prophets, the historical accuracy of the biblical patriarchs, Yahweh worship, or Sodom and Gomorrah. In Ebla studies, the focus has shifted away from comparisons with the Bible. Ebla is now studied as a civilization in its own right. The claims led to a bitter personal and academic conflict between the scholars involved, as well as what some described as political interference by the Syrian authorities. Part 7. Discovery. In 1964, Italian archaeologists from the University of Rome La Sapienza under the direction of Paolo Mattia began excavating at Tell Mardikh. In 1968, they recovered a statue dedicated to the goddess Ishtar bearing the name of Ibitlim, mentioning him as king of Ebla. That identified the city, long known from Lagashite and Akkadian inscriptions. In the next decade, the team discovered a Palace G, dating from c. 2500 to 2000 BC. Finds in the palaces include a small sculpture made out of precious materials, black stones and gold. Other artifacts included wood furniture inlaid with mother-of-pearl and composite statues created from colored stones. A silver bowl bearing King Emmaus' name was recovered from the tomb of the Lord of the Goats, together with Egyptian jewels and an Egyptian ceremonial mace presented by Pharaoh Hotububa. About 17,000 cuneiform tablet fragments were discovered. When put together, they constitute 2,500 complete tablets, making the archive of Ebla one of the biggest from the 3rd millennium BC. About 80% of the tablets are written using the usual Sumerian combination of logograms and phonetic signs, while the others exhibited an innovative, purely phonetic representation using Sumerian cuneiform of a previously unknown Semitic language, which was called Eblate. Bilingual Sumerian/Eblate vocabulary lists were found among the tablets, allowing them to be translated. The tablets provide many important insights into the cultural, economic and political life in northern Mesopotamia around the middle of the 3rd millennium BC. They also provide insight into the everyday lives of the inhabitants, and contain information about state revenues, Sumerian Eblate dictionaries, diplomatic exchanges with foreign rulers, school texts, hymns and myths. Part 7. Discovery. Chapter 1. Library. The tablets constitute one of the oldest archives and libraries ever found. There is tangible evidence of their arrangement and even classification. The larger tablets had originally been stored on shelves, but had fallen onto the floor when the palace was destroyed. The locations of the fallen tablets allowed the excavators to reconstruct their original positions on the shelves. They found the tablets had originally been shelved according to subject. These features were absent from earlier Sumerian excavations. Sophisticated techniques of arrangement of texts, coupled with their composition, evidence the great antiquity of archival and library practices, which may be far older than was assumed to be the case before the discovery of the Ebla library. A sizable portion of the tablets contain literary and lexicographic texts. Evidence seems to suggest the collection also served, at least partially, as a true library rather than a collection of archives intended solely for use by the kings, their ministers, and their bureaucracy. The tablets show evidence of the early transcription of texts into foreign languages and scripts, classification and cataloging for easier retrieval, and arrangement by size, form and content. The Ebla tablets have thus provided scholars with new insights into the origin of library practices that were in use 4,500 years ago. Part 7. Discovery. Chapter 2. Legacy. Ebla's first kingdom is an example of early Syrian centralized states, and is considered one of the earliest empires by scholars, such as Samuel Feiner and Karl Moore, who consider it the first recorded world power. Ebla's discovery changed the former view of Syria's history as a bridge between Mesopotamia and Egypt. It proved the region was a center of civilization in its own right. Part 8. Syrian Civil War. As a result of the Syrian Civil War, excavations of Ebla stopped in March 2011, and large-scale looting occurred after the site came under the control of an opposition armed group. Many tunnels were dug and a crypt full of human remains was discovered. The remains were scattered and discarded by the robbers, who hoped to find jewelry and other precious artifacts. Digging all around the mound was conducted by nearby villagers with the aim of looting artifacts. Some villagers removed carloads of soil suitable for making ceramic liners for bread baking ovens from the tunnels. This recording is a derivative work from Wikipedia. For more information, please visit www.frogcast.org.